Good afternoon, everyone, and thank you for joining us. My name is Saul Simon. I'm proud to have friends and guests with me today. I have moderator Ilene Greene from MarketShare, and Elyse Weber-Sacks will be sharing her insight on caregiving strategies, and then also Allison Busch, an elder law attorney and a friend from home. So today's subject is a little bit of a sensitive type of a conversation. And sometimes this conversation happens out of either concern or fear and a place of, okay, now what do I do? And that's a reaction. And what I'd hope is that many listeners are actually tuning in on a proactive basis to be able to understand some of the dialogue, some of the tools, some of the thoughts, some of the questions, so that you could actually be proactive and be prepared to take and help a loved one, if not yourself. So with that, let's kick this off. I'm gonna kind of throw the ball over to Ilene, and thank you everyone for joining us. And we welcome your feedback after the program. Thank you.
Hi, everybody. As Saul said, my name is Ilene Greene. I'm the president of MarketShare Communications, a marketing firm, and we actually work with Simon Financial Group for their marketing. So I am very happy to be here, mainly because I had personal experience with dealing with an elderly parent who had severe dementia, and so having this now for other people, I wish I say to all of the panelists, I wish I had known all of them at the time I was going through it. I'm going to introduce our three guests. Allison Busch is a partner in HDRB&B in the firm's Trust and Estate Department, and she practices in the areas of elder law, estate planning, and estate administration. She works with clients on a range of issues, including long-term care planning, Medicaid planning, guardianships, and estate administration. She's also authored a paper called The Impact of Welfare Reform on the Elderly of New York City, which was published at the Practicing Law Institute. She's a graduate of New York University Law School. And so what we're gonna do once I give all the introductions is we're gonna go around and ask each of the panelists a question and go through each of those. As we get towards the end, we'll leave a little time for Q&A for anyone who has questions that we haven't answered. Elyse Weber-Sacks is the owner of Connie Rosenberg Associates. She's a licensed social worker in New York and New Jersey, and her experience includes medical social work for a large county hospital center in New York City, where she was supervisor of adult and pediatric rehabilitative social work unit. She left that field for a short while and worked in business, and then returned to her roots, which was her lifelong love of geriatric care, which brought her to work for Connie Rosenberg Associates some years ago. And over time, she became the owner. She is a certified geriatric care manager by the National Academy of Certified Care Managers, and an aging life care professional at the advanced level. And finally, Saul Simon, who is hosting us today, is the head of the Simon Financial Group, a premier fee-based financial planning firm. He is a certified financial planner with over 35 years experience, a certified fund specialist, and registered financial consultant and fiduciary, which means he is bound to act in his client's best interests. He specializes in working with individuals and business owners to develop strategic financial plans that help them reach their family and financial objectives, and works a great deal with people who are approaching retirement and in retirement to plan their estates. So with those introductions, I'm just going to ask each of the panelists to give a 1 or 2 minute overview of what they do. So we'll start with you, Allison.
Nice to meet everybody, see everybody. Thank you, Saul, for bringing us all together. Just a quick snapshot. I do both elder law and estate planning, which often are tangled together, but sometimes are separate. Do make sure that everybody has their estate tax planning documents, powers of attorney, healthcare proxy, living wills, all of that basic paperwork in place for the future if it's ever needed. And then I also work with individuals, couples, and very often families with long-term care planning. And what that really means is there a way to preserve assets of mom and dad against the expenses of long-term care. And so it's looking at Medicaid, seeing if that's a possibility. The laws are different from state to state. I do practice elder law and trust and estates in both New York and New Jersey. And that can actually be very useful for families when mom lives in Brooklyn and the kids live in New Jersey. Which state makes sense? What do they need to know? And the most important part of the work I do is to educate my clients so that they don't take steps that will actually end up being sort of a disaster later on because they didn't know how rule-based long-term care planning is.
Great, thank you. Elyse, a few thoughts about what you do for us?
Sure, and also thanks to Saul for pulling this together and to Ilene for facilitating. I am the president of Connie Rosenberg and Associates Care Management, and care management or aging life care management is really a field that helps families deal with the various challenges that come up in the aging process and also with disability and some younger clients. But we do that both on a consultation basis and also for ongoing care management, where we really do a lot of care coordination, particularly medical care coordination, and helping families often out of state, but not always, deal with the various issues that come up when their family members and their loved ones are aging. That certainly has to do with some chronic physical problems and also with dementia, certainly. So
Great, thank you.
Practice in Northern New Jersey.
Thanks, Elyse. Saul, just a little bit about you.
Hi, Saul Simon, certified financial planner, 35 years in the business. I'm usually an add-on. Every client of mine already has competent people, an advisor, financial man, woman, lawyer, accountant, insurance investment person. What I find is no one is taking this 10,000-foot overview, which is what I do and my team, to look at all the coordination of the insurance, the ownership, the beneficiary arrangements, the coordination with legal documents, and frankly, 9 times out of 10, there's coordination gaps and missed financial planning opportunities. Money is a touchy subject for people, and often people want to do something and it's often too late. And it's better to be proactive than reactive. And when you are experiencing sickness or upset, there's a lot of emotions that are going on. And one of the things I pride myself on is creating harmony and peace of mind so that there's instructions, there's an understanding as to, this is what and how things are going to go if something happened to me in the event of a sickness or a death. I've had this conversation with my parents or I've had this conversation with my children as to what are my values, what is it I'm trying to do, and how do I want things dispersed to who you want, when you want, in the manner that you want, so that there's asset protection strategies in place. The financial products, candidly, long-term care insurance, life insurance, even investments, they're the glue that hold a financial plan together. And my job is to coordinate and collaborate with other professionals to make sure your goals, your needs are at the front of the table so that we all follow that direction.
So on that note, thank you, Saul. Why don't we jump into the questions that people often ask each of you? And I'm going to start with Allison because I think this one is really important. What documents does my parent, mother or father, need to put in place so that I can help her if she needs to get help?
Right. So I mean, sometimes this seems very obvious, and sometimes people say, oh my God, I hadn't thought about that. But before mom or dad reach a point where they can't take care of their own finances and don't have the mental capacity to sign a new document, that is the time to make sure there's a power of attorney and a healthcare proxy in place. Even more important than a will. I mean, a will is important. It distributes assets. It follows mom's important estate plan and wishes, mom and dad or whoever. But a power of attorney, mom and dad are still alive and they really need help, and they need help by somebody who is trustworthy. So there sometimes is some reluctance about giving over control to a child or to a friend. And so there sometimes is some encouragement that is needed so that mom does sign a power of attorney. But when it comes down, especially during this last year, when very often people were mentally competent, but just couldn't leave their homes to do what was necessary, having a power of attorney in place is probably the most important document to have in place. And then once it's signed, bringing that original document to mom and dad's bank and making sure they record it so that they have it when the moment comes when you need to put it into place, that you need to act on it. You're not suddenly scrambling, having somebody in the back office of the bank saying, well, we never recorded it here. We haven't seen the original. Where's the original? You don't want any of that stress when the crisis happens. You want all of these things to have already been completed.
If I understand correctly, the main things are the power of attorney and the healthcare proxy.
Right. Those are called advanced directives. And sometimes a healthcare proxy, it's naming an agent, but there's also language either within that document or a separate document which describes the person's end of life wishes if there's no hope for recovery, that they don't want to be kept alive by artificial nutrition, hydration, respiration. The will is certainly important. It makes life easier for the heirs that there's a will in place. But if there's only going to be, two things done, the power of attorney and healthcare proxy are the ones to go to.
Great. And Elyse, so this brings us to the question you often get asked: my mom and or dad want to stay in their home. They think they're doing fine, but the adult children have noticed changes. So how do you get through to parents, and how do you overcome that resistance for help?
So resistance is something that's very common, and it's something that we face all of the time. And obviously every family is different in terms of what the background is, but some of the common threads are often it has to do with really early stage cognitive impairment on the part of one or both of the parents, and they are aware enough that they know something isn't right and they don't want to get found out. So that's often really the barrier to letting somebody in. Sometimes it's really just a lifelong personality trait. We all know that people who are really controlling and they don't want to give up that control. Sometimes it's really a fear, a newfound fear of loss of control as well. And often I would say it's also the power struggle that goes on between adult children and their parents about the role reversal. And that's very, very challenging for most people to deal with. So some of the strategies that we have used over the years to deal with that resistance, and there's nothing that's foolproof, and every family is different, but sometimes it's helpful to position the help or the guidance or the evaluation or what have you as being really for the adult children, for their peace of mind, not for the parents, who of course will say that they don't need any help. And also stating that, for the adult, on the part of the adult children, that they're not experts in this and they want the best for their parents. So they want to consult with the professionals who do know what the pitfalls are and what things to look for so that they get the best care. And that can often make the parents feel like they're participating in the decisions, and it makes them more comfortable. So those are just some of the things that we have used, but resistance is something that is, is very, very common.
Yeah, I would imagine. I know parents often have a hard time with that.
Absolutely.
Yeah. So, which is interesting because that brings, I guess, to some extent, a question that Saul often gets asked, which is, do I really need long-term care insurance, and why? So,
Well, yeah.
That.
Yeah. So, as we get older, the cost of insurance increases. As we get older, our medical situation alters and changes. So I'm constantly coming from a place of being proactive. You've worked years and years and years to accumulate wealth. A disability, a long-term care event is probably costing about $7,500, if not more, on a monthly basis. You're talking almost $100,000 a year. So what we need to do is determine, can we get coverage? And you got to remember, you're not looking to protect your income, you're looking to protect your net worth. And there are ways of being able, because of modernization of insurance products, there's now a life insurance policy, which I personally own, that has a long-term care benefit rider on it, where in my example, it's $1 million of life insurance. And if I die, my kids, my estate gets the $1 million. If I satisfy 2 of 6 activities for daily living, where I'm not able to take care of myself, I'm incontinent and what have you, my doctor says that I qualify for this benefit, and I'm now able to access $10,000 a month from this insurance product. So here it's like I bought this product that's going to fund my long-term care needs if I do need it, and or it'll fund and produce a tax-free income benefit upon my demise. And frankly, the way I look at life insurance as we're getting older is it's a replacement. It's, here's a check for $500,000, which gives me permission to actually spend $500,000 of my money if it's important for me to want to distribute and pass $500,000 of money on to my family.
Good. Thank you. Allison, let's talk a little bit about another question you often get asked, which is, what is Medicaid? What does it cover? How do you know? How does somebody become qualified? And what are the steps you have to take, to get to that point?
Right. So anybody who's been in this world of looking to get Medicaid knows it's incredibly complicated. More complicated than I think it should be. And, I could speak for 5 straight days about all the ins and outs of Medicaid, and after practicing in this area for 25 years, it's still hard. But just the nuggets of it, Medicaid is a needs-based government program that was created in the late 60s, really as a welfare program to cover the poorest Americans in the area of replacement of insurance when people didn't have it. But what's happened over the last 50 years is that people have been living longer, the care costs have gone up, and there isn't enough money out there to support what it is that people need. So Medicaid has become a useful strategy, a useful program for middle-class Americans. But you're trying to then put a square peg into a circle. So there's a lot of challenges and hoops to jump over in order to actually access it. So Medicaid, both in New York and New Jersey, different rules, but in New Jersey, the applicant can't have more than $2,000 in her name. In addition, Medicaid says when you apply for Medicaid, you need to provide 5 years of bank statements of every financial transaction, of every ownership, of everything that's been in that person's financial life and their spouse. And you have to document where the money has gone in the prior 5 years. So the money can be used for mom and dad's care needs, for a new roof on their house, for lots of different things. But what Medicaid is looking for when they do this audit is, have any of those assets been gifted away, been transferred? And if so, Medicaid says, okay, it's fine. You're eligible for Medicaid because you have less than $2,000 in your name. However, there's going to be a penalty that's imposed as a result of having made gifts. So understanding the role that transfer of assets have in terms of Medicaid eligibility is the key to understanding, which is why getting to understand the rules around Medicaid early is so important, because people very often live their lives without thinking about Medicaid. Grandma pays for a child's college or helps contribute towards a wedding and isn't thinking, oh, I'm trying to get rid of my money because I want to get on Medicaid. They're just living their lives. But what happens is suddenly there becomes an event where Medicaid is relevant, and now these other transactions suddenly feel like you're being punished for having lived your life. So understanding the rules around Medicaid is so important in terms of understanding how to plan for long-term care. But
do you recommend that people speak with a person like you?
Yeah.
I mean, from the standpoint of how does a person know at what point they should be looking at this?
So, I mean, it's a different moment for everybody, but I often say if you've been given a diagnosis, a long-term care diagnosis, the kind of illnesses that have a long arc, but at some point will require an expensive level of care. If you don't have long-term care insurance, if you hear when you're out and about, you know, with friends and they say, oh, you should definitely transfer your house to your children, everybody's doing it. Don't do it until you speak to somebody, because those could be the biggest mistakes that you could make. So, I mean, in a consultation, I give everybody this sort of this background of what the rules look like. And sometimes that's all people need, is just understanding it, because there's a lot of misinformation out there. And again, if you have friends in New York or Florida or California telling you what you're doing, it could in fact be exactly wrong for New Jersey.
Great. So that sort of leads us also to the next question for Elyse, which is adult children are looking at their parents, one or both, and saying they really feel it's time for them to make the move to assisted living, and they have no idea where to start. It's kind of a similar question from your standpoint. Where do you begin? Who do you speak to? What do you do?
Well, that is a good segue, because actually Medicaid also comes into play in New Jersey for assisted living. But there are a lot of things to consider. I mean, most frequently people focus on the geography, and that is important because obviously for them, in most families, people want to have their family member close by. But I always say there are many other things to consider among that. In addition to the geography. So really the most important thing is really what is someone appropriate for assisted living. Often people have no idea what really, from a practical standpoint, what goes on. Maybe someone is appropriate for assisted living, maybe they are for nursing home, maybe they are for memory care. Those are all, that's like the absolute baseline of what you need to know before you can proceed. And it surprisingly, or maybe not surprisingly, people are often very confused about that. They don't really understand what is what kind of care is provided in each of those different levels. So what is someone's functional status? What are the expectations of what can be provided in an assisted living? What is someone really looking for? And then to touch on, or as a continuation of what Allison was talking about, it's very important to strategically use the financial assets, whatever resources someone has. You really want to be able to do that in a timely and in a smart fashion, because for instance, the general rule in New Jersey is that people need a minimum of 2 years private pay before they can transition to Medicaid in an assisted living. But as I often tell people, it's not that you automatically get Medicaid, you get the opportunity to get one of those Medicaid slots. So these are really all, it's very important to do the due diligence before you make any final decisions, because they're really important decisions and you really need to educate yourself about all of those things.
And as a care management company, I guess this would be something, would you actually like meet with the family to discuss the possibilities of those sorts of things?
Yeah, absolutely. And we're often called in to do what, are a geriatric assessment also to help figure out what level of care somebody needs. And we're independent, so we're not, the facility would always send their own person out, but that has a little bit of a different perspective. We're independent, so we're going to give our professional recommendation about what is appropriate for that person, and also thinking a little bit beyond the horizon of where they are right now, knowing how certain chronic illnesses progress and certainly how dementia does, to be proactive and make plans, maybe not just for the immediate right now, but looking a little bit ahead.
Which again brings us around to Saul and the question of how do you protect yourself from running out of money, and how do you determine, how much money you're going to have at what point in time so that you can, live a full life and move ahead.
So it's all about money, right? So now it's all about what resources do you have? And I actually get a chill when I just bring this up, because here you've worked your life to accumulate wealth. And now you're dealing with this emotional trauma, fear, and concern as to how do we take care of our loved one and ourselves, and what's the best way to go about it. So from a financial perspective, I want to look at, what are the assets? What are the ownership arrangements? Are they stocks, bonds, cash, annuities? Are they IRAs? Are they 401ks? Who is the ownership of the asset? And what have you done? Have you set up various trusts? Have you started gifting programs, which Allison had alluded to earlier, or Elyse, by saying things like, I've been paying or helping with college or making a gift for wedding purposes. When looking at the assets, how are they invested? When I need to start taking distributions from this money, I want to be able to take money from something that's liquid versus something that's fluctuating so that you don't get hurt. So what do we anticipate needing on a monthly basis so we can back end and determine how much money do we need to have liquid in order to take a distribution out to help pay costs? What fees are you currently paying on these assets being managed? Is there a tax implication when I take money out of these assets? IRAs and 401k plans, when you take monies out, it's a taxable event. In addition, there's also requirements called a required minimum distribution that you must take out at the age of 70 and a half, or it's actually 72 now, it's been delayed. And frankly, you don't get to practice doing this. This is going to happen, and you're going to learn. And sometimes you really want to bring in guns to give you the coaching and the advice so that you're prepared and you have this 3-year or 5-year plan. And that's why we do financial modeling, to show people how the scenario will play out, be it with some pictures or numbers, as to, people want to make gifts. This is what's interesting about human beings. People want to make gifts. They don't know if they can afford to make gifts. So when someone does a financial plan, they're actually able to make up scenarios to determine, well, what if I do this, and what if I do this, and what if I do this? And I think all three of us have said, 3 times now, to be proactive.
And I would think in a case with financial planning, the sooner somebody would start, obviously, the better the opportunity to.
Yeah. And, yes, the answer is yes. And, given I focus in on this, the elder space, I say to clients, and I'll say this publicly to you, there's once a year, twice a year, we all get together for that special dinner. Maybe it's Thanksgiving, or maybe it's during the holidays, and that's family time. And if we don't organize our assets and we don't communicate things properly, those dinners going forward, when you're not there, may not continue, because children and miscommunications and money can cause problems with people, which break up families. And it's certainly not something most people want to leave as a legacy, that their own children are not talking, or there's fights and there's upsets.
Okay. Let's go back to Allison. We were speaking before about a power of attorney as one of the important documents. You've had questions from people that say their parent refuses to sign a power of attorney. They think they're able to manage their own affairs, but you find them forgetting to pay bills or take medication or do other things like that. How does an adult child, how do you get your parent to say this is something you have to do and it's for your own good? And I think Elyse touched on it a little bit, but from a legal standpoint, what do you advise people?
So, I get the calls from both sides. So sometimes I get a call and I'm working with mom and she says, well, I know I should sign a power of attorney, but I don't want my kids taking away my power. I'm fine right now, but I don't want to put them in a situation where things fall apart. So what I say to mom at that point is, let's sign a power of attorney, pick all three of your children, whatever it is, pick somebody who you trust, and then let's put the original power of attorney in my office. And your kids don't need to know about it, but you are now giving me the authority to give this to them should something happen to you. That sometimes gives mom, dad enough security to know that they're not about to be, ripped out of their own control. That's sometimes helpful. Sometimes I get the call from the children who is saying, mom won't sign this. And she's spending too much money. She's vulnerable to exploitation. She's making bad decisions. And that's a tough conversation, because the fact is, you're allowed to make bad decisions. Any adult is allowed to make bad decisions. It doesn't mean you lack mental capacity. So there's this gray area where the law says if mom is still mentally competent, even if she's making really bad decisions, you can't force her to do anything. So if we've passed that gray area where it's clear that mom lacks mental capacity, she never signs a power of attorney. The problem is, the only way for someone to take control of mom's assets, to make decisions for mom, to make sure she's safe, is to then go through a court proceeding where she seeks a legal guardianship. And a legal guardianship is a very big deal. One, because it's anything in court takes time, money, effort, isn't really fun. But also, you're asking the court to deem mom as lacking mental capacity and appointing a legal guardian. And well, things can always change. Usually there's no going back from that. So that can be a $10,000, an easy guardianship can be a $10,000 4 or 5 month situation, 6 months in New Jersey. So if you can convince mom to sign a power of attorney and then put it away for now, that is a much less expensive, less emotionally draining scenario than just being like, okay, she said no, and just waiting. But kids can't make their parents do anything in the same way parents can't make their teenagers really doing anything. There's a connection between those two roles. You get what you gave.
Thank you. That's an interesting way of looking at it.
If I could just say something real quick, this conversation is about love. And I wrote an article, and if anybody wants to see these 2 blogs I wrote, along with this video, which I really think is very rich, and I've gotten positive compliments on it. But, when you talk to your parents, your loved ones, you got to just say to them, it's not about money, it's about love. You're coming from a place that I never want to look at you in the eye and ask you a question as to what is it you want me to do for you, and you can't answer me, because I want to follow your wishes. I want to follow what it is you want me to do for you. And if you don't have this kind of like loving conversation about this subject, and yes, money is included, I agree, but maybe coming from a perspective of love, blaming it on us today that you went to this seminar and, this man and these 3 women started talking about things that had you start thinking that, what, mom, dad, I love you, I want to do for you. I need to hear the rules. Who is the trustees? Who are the executor? Where are the documents? What do you want me to do for you? Go ahead, I'm sorry.
No, that's a great point, and this is something I experienced, she had things hidden away and we didn't know, where the will was, and it got into a whole bunch of crazy things. And then she eventually ran out of money, and as her children, we had to take care of her mentally, physically, and financially, and it became a huge burden, and it was a terrible way to end her life. And had we known of all of this, it would have been a lot better. And to that point, I'm going to go back to Elyse for a moment. One of the questions that you said has often been raised is that one of the couple, so mom has dementia, it may be a little bit mild at this point, the dad's been taking care of everything, she's sort of, she's happily going about her business, but doesn't really handle things that well. Then he falls ill, has to be in the hospital, and she's unable to manage at all. And sometimes one of the two elderly spouse cover up for each other because they're either embarrassed or they're not even that aware. So, how do you help in that situation, or how do you prepare the family for something like that?
Right. So this is, such a common scenario that we face all the time, and it's very, very common for the well spouse, the spouse who is well, to, as you alluded to, Ilene, to cover up and to compensate for the deficits of the spouse that has some dementia. Sometimes they don't even realize that they're doing it,
Right.
but and it makes it such that it's really not apparent to close family members even, and certainly to the outside world. And then something happens, often, and more typically it is some kind of medical event, a fall perhaps, and the spouse that was healthy and the caretaker spouse ends up in the hospital, and then the what we call like the house of cards falls down. So every week, honestly, we hear scenarios of this, variations of this theme. So and it's very, very stressful for families, because all of a sudden all of these problems are uncovered that they really didn't know existed. So that's when we really can step in as aging life care managers. We can advocate for the spouse that's in the hospital. We can immediately set up care for the spouse that's at home. We can oversee that care and just generally quarterback things. That's what we do, all that care coordination, and really take the burden off the family. But this really speaks to, and this has come up several times today already this morning, about planning and being proactive, because I can't emphasize enough how important it is to have plans in place, the immediate short term and then that longer view, so that you really avert and avoid the crisis that happens when something like this occurs, and sometimes with really very dire consequences. So doing the due diligence and putting plans in place financially, legally, and from a sort of care management standpoint, knowing who to turn to and what the resources are out there is really very, very important.
Yeah, and I think it's interesting that I'm going to say the older generation, meaning of World War II and that generation, I think were very closed about sharing financial information and health information with their children. And I tend to see that people now of being in their 50s, 60s, 70s at this point, I think are probably a little more open about it. I don't know, probably all three of you would have an insight into that, but it tends to seem that way to me.
I agree.
Yeah.
So Saul, as we're getting near the time where we're going to start to, wrap things up for a little bit and open it up if people have questions. One of the last questions that we had discussed was, people come to you, they want to invest some money. How do you determine the risk strategy for their investment so that they're not nervous and they feel comfortable and, feel that they will have money left towards the end of life?
Everybody strives for financial independence. That's just everyone's biggest fear is running out of money and having financial independence. I operate as if my team and I operate as if we're your personal CFO. We're looking at everything that you have, everything that you own, everything that you're responsible for. And then we're diving in a little deeper to look at how is it structured. We're constantly getting changes in the tax law. We're about to go through a massive overhaul in tax from an estate planning perspective, even from an income tax planning perspective, which many of you may have seen in the past year. So being able to, again, put together a financial model, organize my assets in a way to determine, am I going to be okay? Can I make gifts? Can I start to make gifts? If Allison says maybe we should set up some sort of a Medicaid trust, well, what does that mean? Well, how does that look? Where should the assets come from? What's the tax implication when we take the assets? And by the way, please, I laugh at this, but when someone says that you should go ahead and give your kids the house, you're having coffee and someone says you should do something. They don't know anything about you, yet we take it like, oh, okay, I'll do that because they did this. So I really just want to stress that we really want to, just like your own fingerprint. We want to come up with an individual tailored financial plan to help protect you and to help solve the issues that you have in front of you. I told you earlier, the products, the financial investments, the insurances, the long-term care, the life insurance, they're really the glue that hold the financial plan together. And in addition, which is maybe one of my whys, Simon Sinek, one of my whys is about just contribution and being able to create harmony and peace and love and legacy for your family. And by being able to have this type of proactive conversation and be organized and have this discussion about your own resources and your financial needs, it's an opportunity that you're, as much as you can be in control, you are. And then we create dialogue and communication amongst the people that you're going to be trusting to help take care of you, acting as a trustee or an executor, executrix, so that everybody knows the rules. And by the way, lastly, no one has to know about the money. I have these outside conversations with family, clients and their children. I have these conversations as a quarterback, kind of like as Ilene is doing today, as a moderator, sharing and explaining what mom and dad's wishes are. And I don't necessarily have to talk about the specific dollar amount, but I get to share rules, I get to share thoughts, I get to share values, I get to share wishes on mom and dad's part for not only the children, but also the grandchildren. And I'm proud that clients allow me to do that with their family members.
And that's very nice, knowing that you have somebody that can step in and have that conversation, because that can be extremely trying, difficult, and as you pointed out, can sometimes drive a wedge between children of an elderly couple and siblings and so forth. So I think that's really wonderful. So as we get close to the end, would each of you like to sort of do a couple of minutes of a wrap up? So Allison, any other thoughts you want to share, or,
only that, if you're coming to this seminar, you probably are leaving it feeling a little bit like it's been a little gloom and doom. I mean, it's all like, do this or things are just gonna, be terrible. And so I do specialize a little bit in gloom and doom, but I don't mean to. So I'd like to sort of put the positive side that while there's a lot of life events that are very challenging and very difficult, the positive is that when you have the documents in place, or when you have the long-term care insurance, which generally is a better way to pay for care than Medicaid, than relying on a government program, when you have the ability to look ahead, to do things early, it doesn't need to be so gloom and doom. And I do think that a lot of people like avoiding the topics of poor health and death and lack of money. Those are topics that you'd rather not focus on. The last year has taught us that we sometimes don't have a chance to avoid those things. So I guess to put a positive spin on this gloom and doom scenario is that once you look at it, face it, and deal with it, very often you can put it aside for a long time, and then you sort of feel secure that you've done what you needed to do.
That's great. Good advice too. Elyse?
So I guess just as a wrap up, a couple of thoughts. One is that what we often hear, and you actually said it yourself, Ilene, is from people that, I wish I had known about, sort of care management when such and such was happening in my family. So for the people that are able to avail themselves of our services, and this is sort of a shameless plug, I guess, but it really is, it can really help to preserve, and this is something that really resonates with families, and we discuss frequently, is that it helps preserve the adult children's relationship with their parents as in its unique way, as only that daughter or that son can have that relationship. But becoming the caretaker for a lot of people is just very, very stressful for I think all the obvious reasons. So if you can get some support in that endeavor. I think that's really helpful. And it really is not, people are living longer. We all know that. So there could be 20 years of the aging process, and it's very, very challenging. And it's really not a do-it-yourself endeavor. So I think, I forget if it was Saul or Allison had said something about, seeking advice and not going to getting advice from a neighbor down the street. So that's really not the best way to go about this. You really want to have some professionals in your support system, and I think you'll make better decisions and for everybody.
Absolutely.
Allison, can you, forgive me, can you just speak to the role of a child taking on the obligation of helping mom and dad, meaning from a fiduciary perspective and or a liability perspective? Because I see problems and
So the fact is, if you've been named as the agent under a power of attorney, you actually don't have an affirmative duty to act. So mom names you as the agent and you say, screw it, not doing it, you're not required to. But if you do act, then you have to do so in a way that's responsible. You can't take mom's money and go on a vacation to the Bahamas. You have to use mom's money for her and follow the rules of the power of attorney. So you're not, the liability really exists if you mismanage or if you steal the money, then you're on the hook. If you're a legal guardian under the court sort of auspices, then you are in fact affirmatively obligated to act in the best interests of mom. So some people don't want to take on the role as being the agent, and I understand that it can be a very big role, and if you're out of state, it can be just a lot. But you can still decide what you do within that role. Important though is if you are signing documents on mom's behalf, signing into a nursing home, signing into an assisted living facility, you'd never want to sign your own name and leave it at that. You want to say daughter, comma, as POA for mom. And so you always want to make your role of how it is that you're signing very clear on any kind of legal documents. That would be an important sort of takeaway from that.
Thank you.
I also, yeah, go ahead.
No, I was going to say, any last minute thoughts?
Yeah, so, just to get on the shoulders of all of this information, the titling of assets also helps to maybe eliminate probate issues. So again, it comes back to the financial aspect as to what are the resources that we have to work with. And I think that's the beginning. And it's like the lowest level of the pyramid. By having our financial resources organized and structured so that ultimately, you are in control as much as we can be in control of being able to make decisions and provide and take care of these events that are or will be on the horizon. We all want financial security, we all want peace of mind, and we all want to live a healthy, long life. And we need to take the time to do that stuff and make sure that you're dotting your I's and crossing your T's. If you want some quotes for long-term care insurance, it's my pleasure to get you some of those numbers and get you clarification as to, what is it and which kind would be best for you. I can act as your advocate and go out to the market and figure out what product would serve those needs. As Allison said, having a long-term care product is probably better to then have to go down the road of the Medicaid system. And I thank everyone for tuning in and listening. We did record this program. It is available should anybody want to receive it. Ilene, I would very much like, if people are interested, to share the other YouTube piece on the estate planning and the 2 blogs that we wrote with the audience if they're interested.
Absolutely. And we can, share information for each of the 3 of you if anyone is looking to get in touch. But what I'd like to do, and I apologize to the whole audience, if anyone has a question, I don't see a chat room in here. So I don't know if somebody wants to raise their hand, and if I can see it, I would be happy to respond, but I don't know if we have that ability on this. So
Gary, did I allow you? Ask to
I
unmute.
see somebody, Gary. Okay.
Gary, can you talk? Can you?
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. First of all, I want to thank the four of you for putting on this and producing this webinar. It certainly was informative, especially with the mix of information that you provided. I also want to thank you for recording it, because as a owner of a home care company, it will be invaluable for my staff to listen to this at their when they're available to do so. I have one question of Saul, though, and it concerns that hybrid insurance policy that you have. Is it whole life or is it term?
It's yeah, so it's a permanent insurance policy. Term is a temporary, good for 10, 20, 30 years. This is a permanent insurance policy, and it's actually not whole life insurance. It's more of a universal type of a product, which frankly is less expensive than a whole life contract and also has more flexibility. And that's the answer.
So not getting into the particulars of the policy, I find it's very attractive for a number of people, probably in their 40s and 50s in particular, because the price would be affordable. But if the policy is used or unused, the life portion of it, does the benefits pass to the beneficiary tax-free at that point, or is there tax involved?
Yeah, so good question, Gary. So upon death, the section 101 of the tax code says life insurance is income tax-free to the beneficiary. And because of technology and insurance companies being more modern and the government realizing the high cost of long-term care, those disbursements coming off of the death benefit are also tax-free. And then just as an FYI, I'm also having clients, depending on their net worth and their assets, some people are picking these contracts up at the age of 60 and 70 years old. And the thinking here is, I'm not looking at their income, I'm looking at their net worth. And I'm looking at protecting this portion of money for, or if needed, for long-term care. And a lot of people, some people are taking money out of an IRA, and some of these people don't even need the disbursement. And very often they pay the income tax and then they kind of invest it in something else, if you know what I mean. But Gary, thanks for the questions.
Anyone else have, before we wrap up, is there any other question? Okay, I don't see any others. So I guess we will say thank you to all the attendees, and thank you, all three of you, as really well-informed panelists. And I think this was a great webinar, and everybody have a great spring and stay healthy.
Thank you very much. This was wonderful. Thank you, Allison.
All right, nice.
Thanks, Ilene.
Okay.
Thank you, Elyse. Bye, everyone.
Bye-bye.